Welcome to the Ricky Mathews Show. As you know by now, this is the show that celebrates Mississippi, especially coastal Mississippi, and the amazing people that have worked so hard to make this a great place to live, work, and play. We have a great guest today. Get to that here in just a second. I want to share something with you. I come across quotes from time to time. I share them on the show all the time, but one of the things is that I love my morning reading. I mean, I'm a former publisher, so it's in my DNA to want to learn more. And I've often said on the show, the more we learn, the more we better learn how much we don't know, that this process of learning keeps us humble and makes us want to learn more. So my mornings are very much all about, all these different newsletters that I get that aggregate news from around the world. And not just news, but stuff, stuff that will teach me what I need to know. But it's, we have a complicated world, and oftentimes there are a lot of burning issues around the world that you learn about in the morning reading. And this morning I actually came across a Tennessee Williams quote that I'm going to share with you shortly. But I wanted to share a background with you real quick. I was lucky in college because when I got there, I really wanted to learn. I had spent 12 years in high school trying to learn how to learn. It was tough for me, to be quite honest with you. And I often said that I learned through osmosis because I didn't study a lot. I didn't really apply myself, but I battled dyslexia, as I've said on this show before. And it was, when I was growing up, dyslexia wasn't understood the way that it is today. And the good news is today, people can get a lot of help in learning how to learn at a younger age, and they tend to perform really well, to be honest with you, if they get the diagnosis and they get people to work with them. But I had an incredible desire to learn, and once I learned how to learn, I got to college. I was literally a human sponge. I soaked it up. I loved the process of it. I loved my teachers. At least usually, I love my teachers. One of my favorite courses was literature. I loved literature, and I especially loved studying the playwrights. Playwrights like Eugene O'Neill and Arthur Miller. You may know Arthur Miller. He's the playwright who married Marilyn Monroe. But I especially enjoyed Tennessee Williams because he's a Mississippian. He was born in Columbus, spent time in Clarksdale, and he was one of the top three playwrights of the 20th century. But I was drawn to Tennessee Williams. At the age of 33, he wrote The Glass Menagerie, and he won 2 Pulitzer Prizes, one for Streetcar Named Desire and the other for A Cat on a Hot Tin Roof. But he was a deep thinker, and he lived a troubled life. A lot of great writers did. They led a troubled life. For example, I've talked about many times Ernest Hemingway. I've literally read everything he's written, but he was a troubled dude. That is for sure. But this Tennessee Williams quote that I ran across this morning got my attention. And in the quote, he actually uses the word mercurial. And if you don't know that word, let me just tell you what it is. It means that it's fickle. It means unstable. Okay? So remember what I said, that in my morning newsletters, I get to see and read about these burning issues. It does feel at times that we are in a burning building. And here's what Tennessee Williams had to say about that. The world is violent and mercurial. It will have its way with you. We are saved only by love for each other, the love that we pour into the art we feel compelled to share, being a parent, being a writer, being a painter, being a friend. We live in a perpetually burning building, and what we must save from it all the time is love. Anyway, I thought that was a great message this morning, and I just wanted to share a little bit about my connection to Tennessee Williams. Just a wonderful, great playwright who had a lot of important things to say. So now let's shift gears. I want to move over to my friend Oliver Diaz, the former Supreme Court Justice of Mississippi. He's now a thought leader, opinion contributor to SuperTalk Mississippi News, and we'll talk more about that here in a second. But without any further ado, let me say good morning to you, Oliver. How you doing?
Hey, Ricky, good morning. Great to see you. And first of all, congratulations on the new name of the show. I think it's very appropriate, and I'm glad to be a part of it.
Well, thank you, my friend. Look, as I said a couple of times for people who didn't hear it, COSU served us well for a long time. But as new people were brought into the show, they didn't know what view meant. View, a French word that says the visual perception of a region. It fit perfectly, and the show really did fit really well. But people would tend to say Ricky's show. And, we had a lot of internal discussions about it, but eventually, just to make it a little bit easier to remember the show from a marketing perspective, we all decided that maybe we just ought to name it the Ricky Mathews Show. And I think it will help sort of keep the confusion to a minimum, so to speak. But thank you very much.
Yeah.
Oliver, I really enjoyed the visit that we had. As regular readers, listeners know this, that you and I spent an entire show together talking about your time in retirement and the world traveling that you and your wife have done. It's just been incredible to watch that. But, when you do that, it gives you a perspective on the world, doesn't it?
Oh, well, it absolutely does. I really enjoyed listening to your opening and about how, as an editor, you're always open to reading something and learning more. I didn't think about it, but I guess we sort of share that perspective with our professions. One of the great things about being a lawyer first and then a judge is that I got to be an expert in so many different fields. I mean, if a client came to me with an automobile accident and his brakes weren't working, I had to learn about brakes in automobiles. Or if somebody was had an injury to their arm, I had to learn medical terms and medical procedures and things like that. So it was always a learning process when I was practicing law and as a judge. And I've kept that curiosity and that desire to always learn more and want to know more. So I guess that's something we have in common, and it feeds us. And it's worked very well in retirement because I always want to see something different and learn more about a place or a person or a thing. So yeah, that's exactly what I go through in the morning as well.
Hey, one of the interesting conversations I have with listeners. It's fun to do a show like this because you get a lot of feedback. You hear from a lot of people. Social media gives you a chance to really engage people. So I get a lot of notes from people. And it's one interesting. One of the main questions I get from people is, how do you know so much about so many different things?
Exactly.
That's what they ask me. It goes exactly to your point that when you're a publisher of a newspaper, you've got a company to run, you're engaged in the community, and you have the fiduciary responsibility and a First Amendment obligation. And each of those has unbelievable learning curves attached to them. So, you as a CEO, man, you learn a lot about a company. You learn a lot about boards and stakeholders, et cetera, and the community. I've always been super dedicated to engaging lots of hours in the community because I think that when you're doing that, you are able to understand, at least in my case as a publisher, to make sure the newspaper sort of mirrored the importance issues of the community. And then, of course, in the First Amendment side of this, the number of stories that we might do in a given day, just like you as a lawyer, might run the gamut on topics. And so when you do that for a long time, which I did, which you did, you do learn a lot about a lot. And
exactly.
and
I'm very good at Trivial Pursuit.
Right. So what's interesting, though, I really believe what I said, and that is the more we learn how much we don't know. And, it's we're kind of small in this world of knowledge, and it just keeps you humble and wanting to know more. But that's what that's where you are, and your travels remind you of that, isn't it? It not only reminds you how small the world really is, but it also reminds you, gosh, man, every time you go to a different country, there's just a whole smorgasbord of things to learn, isn't there?
Oh yeah, there's always a learning curve, whether it's the language, the culture, just the people, the environment. Sometimes you're in a mountainous region, sometimes you're in a desert region. There's so much diversity, and that shapes the community that you're visiting, and so you have to learn a little bit about that. I'd never heard that Tennessee Williams quote that you had, and I love it. I mean, it's great. Another thing I didn't realize about your dyslexia, struggling with that. I have the dyslexia that comes with numbers. I could not do math.
Yeah.
and always struggled with math. And when I was a younger student, I think I was labeled as a very slow learner because I just couldn't do math. And it comes, I transpose numbers all the time. I can never remember phone numbers or anything. I just have a problem with numbers. But I was able to overcome it as you did as well. But one of the things I was able to focus on is words. I mean, I'm very good with reading and writing, and have come to enjoy it. And like you, I had a great love of literature and reading, and so we're very fortunate to be in a place like Mississippi where we have so many great writers who have always expressed their take on the world, which is always unique, whether it's Tennessee Williams or Faulkner or John Grisham or Eudora Welty or Walker I mean, we just have a plethora, or an abundance, smorgasbord of wealth of writers and stories from Mississippi.
We're with Oliver Diaz, former Supreme Court Justice from Mississippi, who's now a thought leader for SuperTalk Mississippi News. When we come back on the other side, we'll continue the conversation. We'll see you after this break. Welcome back. We're having a visit with my friend Oliver Diaz, who is a former Supreme Court Justice, and he's also writing a column for SuperTalk Mississippi News. We call them thought leaders. And I've had a string of them here on the show. It's been terrific to have this opportunity to visit with them. But Oliver has traveled around the world, and he's got so much great experience. He's been on just about every major media you can think about. Even one of John Grisham's books, The Appeal, was a book that Oliver was an inspiration to John Grisham. I've read, incidentally, every single book that he's read. Hang on a minute, we're getting an alert.
Oh, I just got it too.
So anyway, yeah, Oliver is a guy who's hit on a lot of cylinders. He and his wife have literally traveled the world, has a wonderful perspective. We'll get here in just a second.
Well, let me tell you, Ricky, a lot of people talk about the Grisham book, and they said, wow, that's amazing. John Grisham wrote a story about what you've gone through. And I said, hold on just a second. I said, when John Grisham's writing about you, it's not necessarily a good thing. It's usually not a good thing. So while it is an honor, it can be a mixed blessing.
Boy, I know it. I know that's definitely the case. Hey, listen, let's come back to dyslexia for just a second, because I had an entire show about it. And what you learn about dyslexia, the same point that you just made, that early in your life, you were actually labeled a slow learner. I was as well. I was labeled a slow learner. It wasn't until I got in high school, and I never will forget it, that I was moved from regular English to sort of a remedial English. And my English teacher, I don't think you have a similar story, but she said, "Holy mackerel, Ricky, you're very bright. The last place you need to be in this." I mean, I literally aced her class. She helped me in so many different ways, but mine was reading. I had a difficult time reading. And I can tell you, there was one book, literally one book I read all the way through my entire 12 years of school. Now, I've read a lot of books, enough to get by, but one book that I read all the way through, A Call of the Wild, was the name of the book.
Oh, yeah, Jack
yeah.
London.
But she helped me in ways that I wish I could speak to her today to explain to her what a difference she made. But as soon as I started to ace that class, I get moved out of her class because they said I don't belong here. But she was helping me in ways I can't even imagine. But listen, man, it was just agonizing for me to read. And listen, when I became publisher of the Sun Herald and went on with my career, I'm sure there were English teachers that were literally falling out in their path, hearing that Ricky Mathews was actually publisher of a newspaper, because their experience with me was so difficult. I was a challenging student. I was just challenging. And do you have the same kind of experience?
Exactly the same kind of experience. I was labeled a slow learner as well, because I had real great difficulty with math, and was actually failing a lot of math classes. And so I got labeled a slow learner. But I had one teacher who took an interest and thought that, that you just don't seem like you belong in the slow class that I'm normally associated with. And so he actually pulled my standardized testing that we do all through school. And he said, I pulled your tests, and your IQ scores are just amazing. He said, you're not a slow learner. he said, we've got to do something about this. And so he brought that to the attention of the school authorities, and they actually shifted the focus and put me in a class that I should have been in to begin with. And you know, I had a problem with math, but I don't have a problem with literature. I love to read. I'm very good with words. There, I usually do greatest on all those sort of tests. So, once you finally find your focus and the things that you're good at, you can then bloom, and things progress from there.
That's what happened to me. I had a great conversation with a man by the name of Ronnie Cuz Strickland. You probably maybe don't know him. It's in the hunting community, we know him really well. He works with Mossy Oak, and he did Hunting the Country for 20-something years. He's still, sort of a social media star nationally, representing Mississippi in the outdoors community in a big way. But his grandson, who's 11, has dyslexia, and they were able to find it early. And he goes to a class up at Mississippi State once a week, and he's about to graduate from that class, incidentally. But Ronnie did a show with his grandson, and gosh, man, this kid is so bright, so beyond his years in the way he sees things and sees life. And you hear that a lot about young people with dyslexia, that if they can get through it, they can be an incredible success, or they become a really good manipulator and they end up in jail. As you and I talked about, our jails are full of people with dyslexia, sadly, isn't it?
Oh, absolutely. But it's great now that they're looking for those things. When you and I were growing up, we just didn't know about dyslexia. The teachers and administrators didn't know. But now actually they look for it, and they have tools to help the students. So I think they're much better off now than they were when we were kids.
So Oliver, it seemed fitting to me that your first column, because as we just discussed, you're going to be able to write on a wide range of topics. But the first column you write is a right to travel. And I loved the quote that you did toward the end. In fact, a couple of people, as you know, pointed that out. And I won't steal the thunder about the St. Augustine quote that you shared. I'll let you share it here shortly. But why don't you kind of give sort of the context of what you wrote?
Well, in America, we constantly, you turn on the television, any news program, and you're going to see debates about our constitutional rights, whether it's the Second Amendment, right to bear arms, or like you said earlier, the First Amendment, how far is our right to free speech or publication? How far does that go? You see these debates about our constitutional rights all the time. A lot of people don't realize that the right we have as Americans to travel, not only within the United States, but travel the world, is actually a constitutional right. The United States Supreme Court has ruled that Americans have a constitutional right to travel. Nobody ever debates that or even talks about it. I mean, it's like almost we take that as like an inherent God-given right that, we can travel anytime we want to and nobody can tell us not to. But, that's not the truth. It's a constitutional right that we have to guard and constantly be aware of, or else it can be taken away. Folks don't realize that, when we were an early republic, that you couldn't cross state lines without the proper paperwork or documentation. Can you imagine that today if you wanted to go see a Saints game and you had to show your papers at the Louisiana-Mississippi border? I mean, we don't even think about that. Our weekend in Destin. I mean, got to travel 2 states from Mississippi to get there. That's not always been a free access thing for Americans. We've got to remember that that's a constitutional right that we have to be aware of.
And so when you travel, and you have traveled a lot. In fact, why don't you kind of give people a sense who didn't hear our last conversation, give them a sense of what you did.
Well, my wife and I, after our kids grew up and moved out of the household and went to college, we had some free time. Actually, Jennifer started seeing some of her friends were getting sick. Some women that she knew had breast cancer. Some of their husbands had heart problems, and one of her friends, her husband, dropped dead from a heart attack. And she said, you got a great job. You're making lots of money. She said, but we have enough. We have a lot already. You can take time off from work, and we can actually start traveling and enjoying life. She had to actually convince me. I wasn't on board right away, but she ultimately convinced me, and we would travel slowly at first. I had to sort of get my feet wet before we really dove in. But she convinced me that we actually had enough assets that we could travel, and we could actually travel the world. And so we started doing that, and I've really enjoyed it. We've actually stayed for, I think it was 9 months in South America at one time, just traveling around South America. We did 7 months in Southern Africa. We rented a car in South Africa and drove through several different countries all throughout Southern Africa, and really enjoyed that. We've been through Europe. Last year we stayed for 5 months on the island of Bali, which was wonderful.
And it included travel all over the United States as well.
Oh yeah. I haven't actually been to every single state. I think I've been to 47 states.
But what's interesting about your travels, as we discussed when we had the opportunity to spend the whole show together, was that you always pick the more difficult routes. y'all did some really long hikes, for example, and you did Kilimanjaro. When we come back, we'll talk a little bit about some of the really important milestones in your travels, and then we'll talk a little bit more about this right to travel. When we come back with Oliver Diaz, we'll see you after this break. Welcome back. We're visiting with Oliver Diaz, who is, former Supreme Court Justice here in Mississippi, who's a thought leader now, columnist for SuperTalk Mississippi News. And we're talking about the right to travel, which is his first column. And I really meant it, that there were some very significant milestones in his travels. It'll be interesting to see what's in the future. But, when I think, I spent a lot of time, our family early in our lives, we spent a lot of time spending time up in the Blue Ridge Parkway around about the Appalachian Trail. I always sort of thought one day I wanted to do that. Of course, I had young kids and now grandkids. It's not in the cards for me just to leave and go take that long walk. But, you did a significant portion of the Appalachian Trail. You've had some other very significant milestones along the way. When you look back and you think about these long hikes in these faraway places, what stands out to you?
Well, it's almost like asking you to pick a favorite child. They all have something special when you do something like that. But I really enjoy, Jennifer and I, doing long hikes, mainly because you sort of immerse yourself in whatever environment it is that you're in. And you get a real feel for the people there, and a real feel for the excuse me, the environment and the trail. And so they're all very special. Our first long distance hike was actually through the Sierra Nevada mountains in California. It's called the John Muir Trail, which begins in Yosemite National Park. And it's a 230-mile hike, I think, through the high Sierras. Most of it is above 10,000 feet in altitude. And we walked for approximately 30 days. And you end the hike at the top of Mount Whitney in California, which is actually the highest point in the continental United States. Alaska has some higher points, but in the continental United States, Mount Whitney in California is the highest. So we hiked from Yellowstone National Park to the top of Mount Whitney over a period of 30 days. We had to carry our food with us. All remote backcountry camping. We slept out in the wilderness every night. You have to have a bear canister to keep your food from bears who may be rummaging at night. But it was such a wonderful and peaceful experience. We didn't have cell phones. We couldn't have any contact with the outside world. I had no news reports for almost 30 days. And it was just life-changing. And I think after doing that, we realized that you really don't need a lot of possessions. We didn't need everything that we had back home. We were carrying literally everything we needed in a backpack for 30 days, and we were fine. So we after that we reevaluated everything. We were able to downsize a lot of our life. We sold a bigger house and moved into a much smaller place, and that enabled us to travel even more.
So it included a walk to the shrine of Saint James, the Great, and we know it as the Way of Saint James, the Camino del Santiago. But explain to people how significant that is.
Well, the Camino de Santiago is a pilgrimage. It started as a religious pilgrimage more than 1,000 years ago, and people have been walking this path from their homes in Europe, or actually from all over the world, to reach this the cathedral, which is it's known as the resting place of one of the 12 apostles, Saint James. And people have made this pilgrimage for over 1,000 years. That was just such an amazing experience. It's not a difficult hike at all. It's more of a cultural experience. We were able to walk. We started in France. Most of the trail is in Spain, but we started in France, and just walk. You walk through the countryside, and you walk all day. And you stop at a little village, and we would spend the night in these little European villages, and you just get to really be a part of the local community. I was telling someone the other day that we as Americans if we want a sandwich, we'll go to a fast food joint or even a gas station and pull a sandwich off the shelf, and you've got something to eat for the day. In these little small European villages, they don't have convenience stores or fast food places. We would have to wake up in the morning. We would go to a baker and get a loaf of bread. We would go next door to the butcher and get some sliced meat for our sandwich. And then we'd have to go next door to that to get some cheese from the cheesemonger in town. And then maybe go walk through the outdoor market to get our vegetables for the day. It was a whole experience. It's just a different culture than we're used to. And it was so wonderful to do that, because each time you do that, you have these interactions with locals in their community. And of course, they want to know more about us, and we want to know more about them. So it's just such an amazing experience.
Well, see, so that was more the cultural experience and understanding. Remind people how many miles it was.
Well, the total we walked was right at 1,500 miles. It took us 64 days to walk that. We would walk every day. You don't walk the same amount. Some days you don't feel like walking, so you may walk 6 to 10 miles, maybe. Other days we walk 20 miles. But it's a commitment. I actually had a stress fracture in one of my legs while we were doing it because of. I mean, there's lots of climbing and stairs and things like that. Not that it's extremely difficult, but it's just a repetitive thing, day after day, to get up every morning and know that you're going to walk to another village that may be 10, 12 miles away.
What a great experience. That reminds me, one of the walks I would love to do before, I would say it's a bucket list item, is the walk to base camp at
Mount Everest.
At Mount Everest.
Yeah, that's definitely on my list. That's on my bucket list.
Through those communities along the way, and getting used to the climate as you do the walk. I've watched so many documentaries about it and so many different programs about it. I would love to do that. That's got to be one of the pinnacle walks.
Oh, it absolutely is. There actually are lists of the great hikes of the world, and that's always listed on pretty much every list. It's similar to one that I already did, though, is the hike to Machu Picchu in Peru. We walked from small village in Peru and several days through the Andes and the mountains. Hiking all the way up to Machu Picchu after several days, and the way they time it is the last day of the hike. You leave your little camp where you are, and you walk at dark, and by the time you get to Machu Picchu, it's just right at sunrise, and you see the sun coming up over Machu Picchu, and it's just such a breathtaking experience to be able to see that.
Yeah, my son, as I mentioned to you before, my son Justin did that, and he describes it in much the same way. Whereas the Camino was a cultural experience,
right.
The hike to Mount Kilimanjaro was a challenge. It's less the cultural experience, but more sort of the ultimate challenge. At least that's the way you described it, isn't it?
Yeah. I was fortunate to be able to climb Mount Kilimanjaro, which was one of my bucket list items. I really wanted to do it. For those who don't know, it's the highest peak in Africa. It's not a technical climb. It's one of the highest mountains in the world, but it's not a technical climb because it's so near the equator. There's not a lot of ice. There's ice at the very top, but much of the climb is not. But it was absolutely the most grueling and difficult hike that I've ever decided to undertake. It was basically 5 days of climbing. And when I say climbing, it's basically walking uphill. It's not technical and it's not extremely difficult, but you have to remember that every single step that you're taking is up. Just imagine walking up a staircase every step for 5 days. It takes a toll on you. And so that, but the rewards there are similar. We reached the very peak of Mount Kilimanjaro as the sun was coming up, and to see the sun coming in the highest peak of Africa one morning is just something I'll never forget.
So when you're doing a hike like that, I wonder, because I think about doing a hike in Montana or Wyoming where you're going up, but it's a couple of miles. It's maybe the biggest hike might be 4 miles. That seems brutal, though. It's brutal when you're walking up and you're doing it in half a day. You're not spending day after day after day after doing it. But I remember so well when I did hikes like that. My calves would hurt, my legs would hurt, my feet would hurt. Do your feet and legs ever get used to a hike like that, or you just have to endure through it?
Well, you do have to prepare for those things. And so I usually do a lot of walking and try to do some steps, to get accustomed to it. But it's very difficult here in Mississippi to acclimate yourself to these high altitudes. Mount Kilimanjaro is 20,000 feet. Most pilots in a non-pressurized cabin start using oxygen around 10,000 feet. So Kilimanjaro, 20,000 feet it takes a toll on you. Every breath you take is labored, and you have to think about it.
When we come back with Oliver Diaz, we'll talk about this St. Augustine quote that he used in the piece that he wrote for SuperTalk Mississippi News. We'll see you after this. Welcome back to my show, and my friend joining me today, Oliver Diaz, a former Supreme Court Justice who has traveled the world in a really terrific position to write a column, his first column actually, about the right to travel, and the fact that it's a constitutional right we have. And for people who come here from other countries and they see how free we are to move from state to state, they're usually blown away by that. And for those of us who travel a little bit overseas, we get a chance to see it. Sometimes not so easy to move from one country to the next. You just have to understand the rules and do what is appropriate and whatever. But Oliver's in a great position based on the conversation we were just having about his extensive travel around the world and how that gives you such a great understanding of the world that we're in. Oliver, we're going to get back to your comment in a minute, but I wanted to share, I actually came across something that a friend of mine who I used to work with at Knight Ridder, actually McClatchy. She was worked in McClatchy, and she just returned. Her name is Lynn Dickerson, and she's from California. She's a terrific person, and her husband just got back from a trip to Europe, and she wrote some of her takeaways. And the first two things on her takeaway was this. The first thing was this: there are kind people everywhere and in every language. And second, people laugh, smile, and cry in the same language. Those are two beautiful learnings, aren't they?
That's wonderful, and it's so true. And when we travel, I mean, we realize that the communities that we're in, they care about the same exact things that we care about. I mean, their kids are going to school. They want to, they just want to live in peace and support their family, love their families, and enjoy life. And that's what everybody around the world, everywhere we've gone, it's the same thing.
Yeah.
family, friends, and enjoying their life.
You listen, one of the reasons why Laurie Jackson, who's an independent missionary who's been working in Ukraine for many, many years, she actually helped my cousin's daughter adopt 2 boys from Ukraine, and then there's a young girl who's staying with her now because of the war. But I like to have Laurie on because what we learn about the people of Ukraine is that they're religious. Most of them are Christian. They love their place just like we love our place, and they're being attacked, and they're defending their place because they love their freedoms. And the politicization of a war like Ukraine makes me crazy because we lose sight around strategically why it's important for us to make sure Ukraine wins. But more important than any of that is simply the people there are no different than us.
Exactly.
They love their place, and they are defending their place.
And they're defending their home. Even more than their place, it's their home.
They are. And, what I've encouraged her, in fact, last week she was on with me, and one of their drivers for this kind of mismatched effort, this volunteer effort that's underway to help citizens and what they call defenders, is they've had computer programmers and entrepreneurs and all these people who did these things in their real normal lives are now volunteering as drivers and whatever they can do to help this effort along. And she's for I think 3 shows now, she's had one of them join me. And one of the drivers joined me from Lviv, and his world he was a digital marketing specialist before the war started. Now he's driving, going to the front line, bringing things that defenders need. But it's an amazingly inspiring story. But you at the end of the day, what you shared was this St. Augustine quote. Why don't you kind of share the basis of what that was all about?
Yeah, when I found that quote, it just hit me, and it's an old quote. St. Augustine lived a long time ago, but he said that the world is like a book, and people who don't travel read only one page, and that struck me. You have to see more than just where you are in order to explore the world. One of the main things I wanted to throw out there was that people don't realize how valuable an American passport is. An American passport allows us access to 186 countries in the world without a visa in advance, which is incredible. The United Nations only recognizes 193 countries. We can travel to 186 countries without a visa. Just by contrast, the United States only allows citizens of 40 countries to travel to the United States without a visa. So our American passport is such a valuable document, and it allows us to see the world, and we really should do it. Take advantage of your constitutional right. Take advantage of your passport. The world is out there.
You've seen this experience many times, but to get from Split, Croatia to Dubrovnik, you've got to go through Bosnia. And I wasn't sure, what that was going to be like because I didn't know what kind of ill will there might be, et cetera. But once we got to Bosnia and showed our American passport, man, they were so thrilled that we were there because we had done so much to help them during the war. You just never know what you're going to experience, do you?
Exactly. And I've been to those places and experienced the same thing. What's great is that, it's sort of sad that I mentioned it in the article that I wrote that Americans don't generally travel a lot internationally. I mean, only 40% of American citizens even have a passport. So we don't travel. But when we do and we go to places like that, these people seeing Americans, some of them for the first time, but they've seen America in movies, in songs, in books, and they're so excited to actually meet an American. They want to talk to us and find out more about America. Just a real quick story. I was in Zimbabwe, and the driver that I hired to take us around there, he said, I always see in America, he said, I've always wanted to know about this. He said, every American movie I watch, I see Americans eating nachos. I can't imagine. I don't remember a movie where Americans eat, but he's seen this. And he said, I've always wanted to taste nachos. Can you tell me about nachos? I said, look, we'll do even better. I want to show you how to make nachos so you can do. We actually took him to the supermarket and showed him how to buy the ingredients. and make it for himself. But yeah, people are excited to see Americans. They want to know more about us.
That is so cool. Well, we're out of time for today. Oliver, it's been a pleasure to spend some time with you. Thanks for writing a column. Can't wait to see what your next topic is. We'll have you back on to talk about it. But this has been Oliver Diaz. Thank you for joining us, and we'll see you tomorrow.
Thanks, Ricky.